Welcome to Tardisian Files.
Hello listeners! It has been 2 weeks since the conclusion of this season of Doctor Who, and by extension, Ncuti Gatwa's time in the TARDIS. So it's no surprise that in this episode we will be discussing our thoughts on the reality war. Without further ado, let's get into the review. Now, there was a lot going on in this episode, as it was 68 minutes long in total, so I will keep the recap as concise as I can. So, the episode picks up where it left off, with the Doctor falling from the Bone Palace. He is then rescued by Anita Ben, who pulls him through to the Time Hotel in the London of 4202 AD. She explains that the hotel is in peril as the Earth of 2025 is trapped in a time loop created by the Rani and fueled by a wish from Conrad Clark, always ending in Earth's destruction right before it resets, leaving the hotel's time period as somewhat of a paradox. At the hotel, the Doctor and Anita work to restore the memories of his companion Belinda Chandra before heading to UNIT and restoring the natural flow of time in the tower, breaking the wish over the rest of the Doctor's allies, including Shirley Ann Bingham and Ruby Sunday. The Rani and Mrs. Flood reveal their plan to resurrect Omega to use as a genetic blueprint for a new Time Lord race. The Doctor fights back, heading to the Bone Palace, safeguarding Belinda's daughter Poppy in a zero-room chamber built by Susan Triad. However, when Omega emerges from his underverse tomb, he emerges as a gigantic, monstrous living corpse, having been changed by the underverse's whimsical nature into the embodiment of his own legend. Omega turns rogue and devours the younger Rani, while Mrs. Flood escapes using the time ring. The Doctor then uses the Vindicator to banish Omega once more. At the same time, Ruby, using the Indigo teleport device, seizes control of Desiderum in Conrad's chambers and undoes his wish, restoring reality and wishing Conrad to live a happy life. Reality resets, and despite Poppy continuing to exist for a few hours after the wish ends, the Doctor loses Poppy due to time's correction, until Ruby, who still remembers her, challenges the Doctor to make it right. In a desperate bid, the Doctor channels regeneration energy, with the help from the 13th Doctor, to shift the timeline just enough to bring Poppy back. Now, as Belinda's daughter, not his. The Doctor departs, regenerating into a new, very familiar face. Okay, so, as I said, a lot going on in this episode. True to Tardisian tradition, I am going to start off with the pros. The first being the time loop. To me, this was a coherent way of keeping the story flowing, because at the end of the Wish World, I was really wondering how exactly the story would continue if Earth was being destroyed. Additionally, the time loop aspect also allowed for the Time Hotel to be used in this story, with the temporal uncertainty allowing for the hotel to still exist, but not without instability due to timeline being in flux. That brings us to Anita. I said it when I reviewed Joy to the World, I didn't think that we'd seen the last of her after the Christmas special, and I personally loved the Time Hotel, not just as a concept, but as a writing device for Doctor Who to take a few liberties with bending time travel rules in a way that doesn't break established canon. Both the Time Hotel and the Doctor's regeneration scene in the light of Joy's star really was a lovely nod to what is arguably my favourite Christmas special in Doctor Who so far. And so I was very happy to see the Time Hotel playing such a pivotal role in this episode. Speaking of throwbacks, this episode was full of a couple of classic and revival Who references. The first, probably the most noticeable one, was the Indigo device, used by Ruby to access the Bone Palace, last seen in Stolen Earth and Journey's End, when it was used by Martha Jones to escape New York and eventually head to Germany to access the Osterhagen station. I'm guessing UNIT figured out that it had a neural interface, as Ruby was injected with a biosync to allow her to use the device a lot more seamlessly than Martha had. Next, you had the Zero Room. A clear nod to a chamber in the TARDIS that was first seen in Castrovalva and used by the 5th Doctor to recover from his traumatic regeneration. Not only was the new Zero Room true to the original, but it ups the ante for the lengths that both the Doctor and Belinda were willing to go to preserve Poppy's existence. As the Doctor even said, if everybody died in battle, then the Zero Room would become a prison. Belinda and Poppy would be locked in for eternity, never aging. And all Belinda said in response to this was, at least she would have her daughter. That was a very touching moment, I thought. Speaking of the battle, I think we all need to take a moment to appreciate Unit Tower's insane battle arsenal. I mean, the whole tower can rotate to take on enormous bone beasts. I don't know about you all, but I'm really interested to see what else this unit base can do, and hopefully the War Between the Land and Sea, airing next year, will explore that further. In that same vein, I loved Unit's battle with the bone beasts. It was so cool to see all the unit characters we know and love taking up arms and throwing all hands on deck to take on these colossal beasts. I'm really hoping that this scene will serve as a taste of the kind of action-packed drama that I'm hoping the battle between the land and sea will be. Moving on, we have the Ranis. Now, there was a lot that I enjoyed about the performances from both Archie Panjabi and Anita Dobson, so I'm going to split the pros up between the two. Starting with Ms. Panjabi, I was very intrigued to actually hear her Rani interact with the Doctor and get a sense of what she was like as a person. For one thing, unlike many Doctor Who villains, she very clearly explained how she survived the Master's genetic slaughter attack, a method that stuck true to her nature as a biochemist. Next, her motivations were far less egotistical than the Master's ever were. If we take a moment to compare the two quickly, the last scheme the Master had for the Time Lords was to convert them into an infinitely renewable army of Cybermasters and using that army to conquer all. Whereas in comparison, the Rani had no intention of taking over the universe. She just wanted to save the Time Lords from extinction and restore fertility to the species. Admittedly, yes, the Rani did want to build Gallifreyan society in a way that she saw fit. However, her reasoning was because the Gallifrey of old never truly accepted her. So if you look at it from that angle, you could actually argue that she merely just wanted to be around her own people and be accepted by them as she was. The way she went about it was obviously wrong, but in contrast to the Master, who just wanted the Time Lords and the Doctor to hurt just as much as he was hurting, the Rani actually wanted to save her race despite them rejecting her originally. That's actually not so bad. Although if you look at the Rani's lack of ethics, I thought it was actually quite amusing when she was standing in front of Unit and then seeing how everybody was just exasperated by her attitude when she rejected their proposal that she use Poppy as the genetic template for the new Time Lords, purely because she viewed Poppy's human side to be a contamination. Now, this kind of attitude does exist in real life, sadly, as there are some families where some children or grandchildren may be favoured over others because they are considered to be full blood. So anyone in the audience who's experienced this kind of attitude does know how exasperating it can be growing up with those kind of attitudes. And seeing Unit's reaction to the Rani, I think, really encapsulated that frustration very well. No one yelled at or insulted the Rani for her narrow-mindedness, they just all had such a look of defeat on their faces as if to say, really? And finally, there is one more aspect of this Rani's character that I actually found quite interesting. In the same confrontation where the Rani ultimately reveals that the wish will end when Omega is free, she actually apologises to the Doctor when he reveals that the wish will cause Poppy to disappear. This seems almost out of character for the Rani, who historically held very little regard for the Doctor beyond his occasional usefulness to her. However, now it seems that she's come to regard him as somebody worth caring about just a little bit. She even said in The Wish World she was never his enemy. And it appears that she even admires him, believing him to be superior to humans. Even in her Mrs. Flood incarnation, she referred to him as that clever boy at the end of The Empire of Death. This to me indicates that this older, more mature Rani appears to have some fondness for the Doctor, if for no other reason than for the fact that he is the only other one left in the universe who's like her. Moving on to Ms. Dobson. Mrs. Flood's role in this episode followed the same trend as in the Wish world. She was very much loyal to her successor, and despite my expectations, that trend continued throughout the episode. However, she appeared to have a little bit more wisdom than the other Rani, ironic since she was technically younger, because when it was clear that Omega was a danger, she stepped back and actually took the opportunity to escape. I personally thought her reaction to her successor's demise also showed the complexity of their relationship, as it was clear that Mrs. Flood, who appears to understand bi-generation as a form of reproduction, came to view the other Rani as her child of sorts. That said, she was clearly fed up of being treated as a second-class citizen by her own self, so Mrs. Flood's reaction was clearly one of relief as well as of sadness. Now that she's escaped, I'm hoping that the Rani will make a future appearance, potentially with a new face, which will answer another burning question of mine. Can the predecessor of a bi-generated Time Lord still regenerate separately from their successor? Well, I hope we find out. If not, it would be absolutely lovely to see Anita Dobson return to Doctor Who in a later season. Moving on, I want to talk about Ruby's confrontation with Conrad. Now, I know this might be a divisive opinion, but I personally thought that Conrad's ending conveyed a very helpful lesson for younger audiences. Grace. Because on one hand, Conrad was freed by the Rani and wished a very broken, bigoted world into existence, and that was obviously very wrong. We all know this. However, Ruby saw through this wish and noticed something that even we as the audience didn't know. Conrad tried to give everyone a family in the Wish world. Now, when I heard in Lucky Day that Conrad's mother was alive in 2025 and he'd paid for her to live in a villa in France, I took that to mean that their relationship was fine. But what I and many of the other viewers may not have actually considered is that Conrad may not have had a very stable upbringing. Unlike Ruby, we didn't realise that his father was either not in the picture or not a good influence in his life, and we also did see, at the beginning of Lucky Day, that Conrad's mother dismissed him very quickly. It was implied that she'd also been drinking that evening, and she just impatiently flipped him round the head. That, actually, when you think about it, that doesn't sound like they had a very positive relationship at all. Yes, Conrad may have grown up to be a bigot, a liar, and a criminal, but Ruby could see through all of that deflection and posturing that he always did, and underneath, she could see that Conrad's perception was coming from a place of unhappiness and baggage from his childhood. Because of that, Ruby's decision to use Desiderum's wish power not to punish Conrad, but to give him a second chance at life, was not a bad way to end Conrad's story arc, because what we saw at the end was that in the new timeline he was happy and working a job where he was fulfilled. Did Conrad deserve punishment in the original timeline? Absolutely. But he got it when he was discredited, had his arm bitten off by a shriek, and was then arrested and sentenced. There was no need to punish him further. And sometimes it is nice to see a seemingly irredeemable villain turn over a new leaf, even if he did get off lightly. Speaking of which, Desiderum's happy ending. As I previously said, defeating the Pantheon of Gods often involves using their own nature against them, so I found that his disempowerment through one final wish was a fitting way to end his role as a threat in the episode, especially because his wish power was kind of his only threat. He was a baby, he wasn't really capable of doing anything, he was only dangerous because he was in the hands of dangerous people. What's more, even though I am sad that they couldn't restore his family in the 19th century in Bavaria, I think it was a very sweet moment where the Doctor decided to give the baby, renamed Jo, to Carla and Cherry to look after. Carla was basically signing up for another 20 plus years of parenting, but she accepted the responsibility without hesitation, and Cherry's first instinct was to rename him after her late husband. I love these two for this. It was such a lovely ending. And yes, even though I am sad that Joe's parents couldn't be found in Bavaria, I do think that it was absolutely lovely to sort of end the Sunday family arc with a new addition. And the Doctor even said, Carla's the best mum he knows. It was so heartwarming. Another thing I liked about this episode was seeing the Doctor actively fight for his family. Now, we have seen the Doctor being a father before, in The Doctor's Daughter, when we saw the 10th Doctor come to terms with and grow to care for Jenny. But Jenny was an adult and perfectly capable of looking after herself. Poppy was a toddler, and she needed the Doctor and Belinda to care for her. And even though the half-Time Lord version of Poppy vanished, for a moment we did actually get to see the kind of family the Doctor and Belinda would have had with her, and it was very bittersweet at the end when the Doctor meets the human Poppy, and he's clearly a little disappointed that he cannot be her father in any version of reality that makes logical sense. It really shows the sentimental side to the Doctor and shows a lot of emotional growth on his part compared to how he was several regenerations back. Speaking of a few regenerations back, Anita's trip down the Doctor's time stream was one thing, but then we had another surprise cameo in this episode from Jodie! Look, fans can say what they like about Chris Chibnall's writing, but I for one have been going back to Jodie Whittaker's episode a lot over the past few months, and to see her in the episode acting alongside Ncuti in a scene that was very clearly very personal for the Doctor really did bring a warm feeling to my heart. It was like seeing someone you love return from home after being away for so long. And I remember hearing the leaks and thinking, surely this won't tie into the plot at all, but somehow they made it fit. And whether it was a throwaway scene or not, I don't care, I loved it. It was so nice to see Jodie stepping back into the 13th Doctor role, even if it was just for a few moments. Moving on to the cons, unfortunately there were quite a few for this episode. The first off being Omega. I actually watched the 3 Doctors in the 2 weeks since the Reality War aired, and I will say, compared to what we got in the Reality War, the original Omega really didn't need much revamping for the modern era. He wasn't a mad god, but a madman driven so due to loneliness and abandonment. Even though in his madness he believed that he should have been a god, his main intention was to return home. It is always a gamble for Doctor Who writers to rewrite established canon. We all know this from the backlash that the show got for the Timeless Child arc, which I personally don't have too many problems with. However, if you're going to do it, you should probably do it properly. While the Timeless Child arc did break canon in some ways, it actually fixed some canon in other ways, which I will happily discuss in a future episode. With Omega's retcon, on the other hand, it just didn't evolve the character at all. He had a grand total of just over 3 minutes of screen time for a start. Second, he came out of his tomb as some kind of dried out giant corpse, which made absolutely no sense because the last time we saw him he actually didn't have his own body, so he was trying to steal the Doctor's. Thirdly, there was no explanation as to how he ended up in the Underverse, since he was originally trapped in the Antimatter universe after falling into the newly created Eye of Harmony, hence why he couldn't return and why his body disintegrated over the millennia of being there. In my opinion, the new Omega was just a completely wasted opportunity here because he wasn't even the main threat of the episode as he had been previously. He was just a side plot. And this so-called mad god basically fell into the Underverse and came out as a giant demon with Cookie Monster logic. It's like, oh, me return to the universe to eat Time Lords. Oh, look, Time Lord eats the Rani. Yummy! Not only was it just an unfitting end for the Rani, but while admittedly doing a better job of closing the Bi-Generated Rani's arc than the Bi-Generated Doctor's arc, but it also just felt kind of rushed. if Omega had actually been a substantial plot point and had, I don't know, taken over the Bone Palace and rewritten reality again with Desiderum's powers, then it would have made more sense. Instead, he was reduced to a lumbering beast that was defeated about as quickly as he was released. It's just, overall, not a good retcon at all. The episode didn't need a giant corpse Omega, like, it just had to be his body, and then following on from the three Doctors, maybe it could have just been an empty suit of armour and his consciousness was just gone from it. Like, yeah, I really didn't like this retcon at all. Next, and this was my biggest gripe with the episode, the lack of the main threat. Omega was not the main threat. Desiderum was not the main threat. Even the Rani wasn't the main threat. The real threat was the Doctor and Belinda fighting so hard to keep Poppy in existence. On one hand, seeing this family dynamic was touching, but on the other hand, I feel like Poppy may have been unhealthily fixated on by the Doctor and Belinda because they said they had memories of being her parents, but they couldn't even remember when she was born, because she was not real. And the reason I say this is unhealthy is because the Doctor literally gave his life and actually took liberties with time to force the timeline to bend what he wanted. While on one hand, yes, he did technically save Poppy, on the other hand, he also rewrote Belinda's life and gave her a child that she didn't have before. Speaking of which, Poppy's insertion into the timeline. Now, I do think it was quite clever how they never specified why Belinda needed to get back to her parents in the original timeline, and then in the revised timeline it was shown that she wanted to get back to her daughter, which keeps the series events basically the same. Fine, there's nothing wrong with that. What I had a problem with, however, is that the Doctor went through all of that trouble to get back their daughter, just for her to come back as Belinda's daughter. Not only do I feel like all the build-up we got from the cameos of Carol Ann Ford seem kind of pointless, but also it once again leaves a pretty big plot hole. In The Legend of Ruby Sunday, the Doctor said he had a granddaughter before having a daughter, but now it appears that no remaining Gallifreyan, of whom the Doctor is now one of two, cannot reproduce. And I thought Poppy was going to solve that by being his half-human daughter, who then resettles on Gallifrey in the past, and has a three-quarter Gallifreyan daughter, who grows up to be Susan, and all of that timey-wimey jazz. But that's not what happened at all. And why was he having visions of Susan, if it weren't to motivate him to save Susan's mother? It really makes no sense to me, at all. And another thing that also made no sense to me actually came from the cutscenes. One of the scenes with Mrs. Flood that was cut was meant to reveal that it had actually been her who had stolen the Master's Gold Tooth from Unit's Tower in 2023. But it was reportedly cut as Russell didn't want to tie up all the loose ends. While obviously I'm intrigued to see how he or other future writers may choose to address this, I think that if it wasn't directly linked to the plot in the episode, the scene just should have remained so that Mrs. Flood's incarnation of the Rani had more of a reason to return in a future episode after escaping. Finally, and I am going to say it, I really feel like Nshuti's time in the TARDIS was just cut too short, too soon. He has the highest number of Dr. Light episodes compared to any other Doctor, and the reason for the 15th Doctor to regenerate, while altruistic in some ways, was almost wasted because again he was trying to save his child and only ended up with no child to call his own. Compared to other regenerations, it just falls a little bit flat. That's not to say that I'm not happy about Billie Piper's return. I am. She's an amazing actress, and while I know that there are plenty of people out there who aren't thrilled with a former companion coming back to play the Doctor, I think it's worth waiting until we actually see Billie Piper in action as the 16th Doctor before making our minds up about this incarnation. So, despite my anticipation and excitement to see Billie Piper in action as the 16th Doctor, I still really do feel quite sad that the 15th Doctor has left after only 2 seasons. It just doesn't feel like he had enough screen time, and I really would have liked to have seen the originally planned season 3 that was allegedly meant to include the 15th Doctor and wasn't written for the 16th Doctor. And now that it has to be rewritten, I can only imagine the kinds of plot holes that this could open up. But at the same time, it may work better for the 16th Doctor. We don't know. We need to wait until the series airs. But at the same time, I am going to miss Ncuti Gatwa as the 15th Doctor, and I'm sure many other fans are going to, so that was a pretty big con for me. Even though I knew it was going to be a regeneration story, I really, really wish that it hadn't been. Overall, this episode was somewhat disappointing, in my opinion, and it really didn't live up to the hype surrounding it. That said, it did have some strong points, with nice throwbacks to episodes from both Ncuti's time in the TARDIS and from the revival and classic eras of the show. UNIT was a strong presence in this episode, which I think will really help to showcase some of what we can expect from the war between the land and sea next year, which I'm very much looking forward to. What did you think of this episode? Let us know in the comments of your favourite streaming app, or in the comments section for our social media posts for this episode on Instagram and TikTok at Tardisian Files Podcasts. We also have a Blue Sky account now under the handle at tardisianfiles.bsky.social, where we will not only be posting about new episodes, but we'll also be using it to engage with our lovely viewers to hear more of your ideas and feedback. Please leave a like and subscribe, and as always, see you next time on Tardisian Files.